This will sound very strange, but the actor Harrison Ford is known for his aviation mishaps. God is using Harrison Ford and his acting career, which is filled with him in roles of a pilot. And he is known for his aviation hobby, and he is a spokesman for the aviation community. And he narrated the IMAX movie Living in the Age of Airplanes. And in terms of prophetic signs, Harrison Ford's aviation mishaps serve as a witness, which is why Harrison Ford was nominated for an Oscar award for his role in the movie Witness, because God has used Harrison Ford as a witness. That is pointing to the predicted date that Kamala Harris will die in a plane crash. This includes, for example, a movie named 6 Days, 7 Nights, in which Harrison Ford actually flew the plane. It is actually Harrison Ford flying the plane in the scenes in this movie. The plot of this movie centers around a plane crash, and Harrison Ford's character's name is Harris. This Harrison Ford prophecy is predicting that Kamala Harris will die in a plane crash, her Air Force Two plane, caused by turbulence, lightning, and a bird strike in St. Louis as she flies across the country on December 24th, 2024. The date that this video is posted proves that this prediction is being made ahead of time, as does this time-stamped email and forensic notes PDF document. If you are skeptical for some reason, please email me and I will forward these to you. As can be seen in this email, the prediction that Kamala Harris will die in a plane crash has been known since at least August 5th, 2021. All right, to begin, I just want to start with something that I just learned. This video has actually been in production for a long time, but something was just learned today, actually, and it regards Anne Heche. So Anne Heche, she starred with Harrison Ford in the movie 6 Days, 7 Nights. Now, as I mentioned, the movie is about a plane crash. The plot of the movie is actually a plane crash on a remote island that Harrison Ford's character pilots. And as I mentioned, it was actually Harrison Ford that piloted the plane. It took a lot for him to convince the studios to let him do it because of insurance reasons, but he actually pilots the plane in the movie. And that's because Harrison Ford is known for his aviation hobby, as I mentioned. And so, anyway, not only that, the character's name, Harrison Ford's character's name in the movie is Harris. That's right. That's right. Okay, and the movie is about a plane crash. Now, Anne Heche stars in the movie with him. She's the love interest of Harrison Ford in the movie. So she died in a crash. Well, she died in a few days after her crash. But you will recall perhaps how she had a car crash. Okay, so we've got this crash theme going on here, and she died she had her crash, I should say, on August 5th, 2022. And that day was exactly 1,260 weeks after the release of the movie 6 Days and 7 Nights. That is mind-boggling, because this number 1,260 is mentioned 7 times in Bible prophecy as being symbolism for the period of the end and the Antichrist. Which, by the way, we are already well inside. In fact, we're at the end. We've passed. That's another story. But when the prediction comes to pass, it'll prove what I'm saying, and I'm just going to say that, and that's all. But anyway, it's 1,260 weeks exactly between her crash and the release of the movie about a plane crash that was piloted by a pilot named Harris. Okay? Now, her crash, Anne Heche's crash, is 239% of a year, before it is predicted that Kamala Harris will die in a plane crash. This is astounding also because it's so amazing, actually. Okay, so first of all, let's just break it down one step at a time. The way God's true big picture of signs, patterns, and connections works, which is only being explained on this channel, is it works on the principle of second and third and multiple witnesses confirming a matter as the Bible says is required. And this is what makes what is being explained on this channel true and not a product of one's imagination and different and unique than everything else on the internet that claims to be an analysis of God's prophetic signs. And if we think about it, one simple way in which God would provide a second witness for us is through pairing certain numbers together, such as 9 and 23. And I know this because I've been studying his big picture of signs from morning until night for more than full-time hours for 7 years. And so 239 is a pairing of 23 and 9. That's because the Antichrist, the basketball president, wore 23 in high school and was inaugurated in 09. Also, 23 is the 9th prime number, and on and on. All right? Now, also, 239 is the 52nd prime number. And that's amazing because God uses the number 52 as symbolism for 2 times 26. And I know all of this because I've been studying his big picture of signs, right? Just, and when the prediction comes to pass, it'll prove what I'm saying is true. But anyway, 52 hints at 2 times 26, and that's because H226 in the Hebrew concordance is the word that means prophetic sign. And so therefore, this is a confirmation. God uses this number 239 as a confirmation that it is a prophetic sign connection. Okay? But it's also relevant, another second witness to this is the fact that we are talking about Harrison Ford. The reason why Harrison Ford has his name is because this hints at two things, well, rather, I should say, two presidents in history. All right? Ford, the only unelected president who was never elected vice president or president, he was appointed instead, just like how Barack Obama will be appointed, and that's how he'll overcome the 22nd Amendment. That's why Ford. But Harrison, there were two Harrison presidents, the only grandfather-grandson presidents, the 9th and 23rd president. I should say again, the 9th and 23rd president. That's a pairing of 9 and 23, which is why we have the 23 and 9, 239% of a year connection from this Harrison Ford sign here, because Anne Hesh is Harrison Ford because of the movie. Okay, and the reason why God points to the 9th and 23rd presidents is because the President Grover Cleveland was the only president to serve non-consecutive terms, just like Barack Obama will serve non-consecutive terms. He skipped the 23rd presidency, that of Benjamin Harrison. William Harrison was the first president to die while in office. He died exactly 1 year while in office. 1 month, I should say, after being in office. And that's a hint at Kamala Harris, who will die while in office. So, okay. So that's our story here. Another thing too, though, is Anne Hesh died just 5 plus 5 days after the prophetic flooding in St. Louis. Kamala Harris is predicted to die where the flooding was in St. Louis, which was on the I-55 highway, which connects to Chicago, the home of the Antichrist, and on and on. Okay, that's good. I'll leave it at that. And that's amazing too, because that day, July 26, 2022, this prophetic flooding that was expected in advance, by the way. This was, by the way, when I first learned that Kamala Harris would die in St. Louis. Her plane crash would be in St. Louis. It was after this sign, and then a couple months later, it all came together for me. In October in 2022. But anyway, this date of this flooding in St. Louis was the day that Kamala Harris was exactly 3,014 weeks old. That's because St. Louis is the area code 314. She's predicted to die in Busch Stadium, and that will hint or point to the burning bush in Exodus 3:14. This will ultimately all be pointing to Jesus, who was in chronology in the book of Matthew, came after 14 plus 14 plus 14 generations. 3 14s. 314, pi. Exodus 3:14, by the way, is where God told Moses his name, I am, which is the exact same symbol for pi. Okay, so there you have it. That's an amazing thing. I could have made this title of the video here a specialized video if I wanted to continue with this about the 6 Days and 7 Nights movie and connection. And Hesh, there's lots more to say. And Hesh also starred in Psycho. Kamala Harris will die in St. Louis, which will point to the X that was engendered with the eclipses over America, which is symbolic of the mark of the Antichrist, which is leading to mass demonic possession of those who have taken it. And that's why Anne Hesh here in this context, because she starred in the movie Psycho, and people that took the mark of the Antichrist are soon going, or have been becoming, but really much more so. Next June, I believe, the signs indicate they're going to become psycho. All right, before we begin this truly amazing story regarding Harrison Ford signs that are depicted in this diagram here, I want to get something out of the way first, which is the end of the diagram here, this October 17th, 2023 date, which, as you will hear in the rest of this video, was the date it was predicted that Kamala Harris would die in a plane crash. And as I will explain, this date is very relevant in regards to Harrison Ford. Okay, now the way it works, the way God's true big picture of signs, patterns, and connections works, which is only being explained on this channel, is it is an interconnected web. And none of the prophetic signs from God can be fully or properly understood without their context and connections with the other prophetic signs. And God does this in order to tell stories. He develops these trails of signs that have steps along the way in order to abundantly connect these other prophetic signs and develop these themes. For example, Harrison Ford and the meaning of Harrison Ford that I explain in this video and other videos, and how it hints at Kamala Harris, and how Harrison Ford's aviation mishaps are communicating the aviation mishap of Kamala Harris. So this is one example. This is how these things are learned. It is through God's true big picture of signs, patterns, and connections, which is only being explained on this channel. Not only is the full intended meaning of God's prophetic signs not understood by others that, no offense, but are looking for prophetic signs, but the vast majority of them are even missed, because they wouldn't know to recognize the signs without the building upon building upon building on these stories and themes God is demonstrating through his signs, through the connections from other signs is what I'm saying too. So the vast majority of signs end up being missed by other watchers. Now, October 17th was 100% correct. Okay, all of the analysis that you see in this diagram was 100% correct. Okay, because we received the relevant, truly relevant prophetic signs on this date that we expected in advance. This is how it works. Okay? And so, October 17th, it was not possible to know prior to the date that it would only be a step. Well, I forget. I don't recall if it was learned or not prior to the date. Sometimes it's possible to know that the date God is pointing to will only be a step. All right? But in any case, God points to these dates overwhelmingly, and it could be a step or it could be the end of the trail. And so you act accordingly, which is to present the case that God is showing regarding how he's predicting Kamala Harris will die on a particular date. That's all you can do, unless you know ahead of time that it will only be a step. If you don't know for sure, then you need to act, I personally believe you need to act accordingly and tell the world what God is communicating. So that's why you end up seeing in this diagram, this date that is predicting Kamala Harris will die in a plane crash. Now, the signs we received on this date, which were 100% confirmation of the analysis, was a plane sign, 2 plane signs, 2 presidential plane signs. Okay? So what I'm about to explain a little bit, briefly, superficially, is explained much more in the absolutely amazing and must-watch Gaza explosion video. The reason why I titled it, and there's actually 2 parts, and there's so much information, and it's so important. But the reason why I titled it the Gaza explosion video is because that was the day of the, if you will recall, the explosion of the hospital in Gaza, 10 days after the invasion of Hamas. Hamas shot a rocket at one of its own hospitals. All right? And then there was the outcry in the Arab world, etc. Okay, and because it was blamed initially on Israel, but it ended up being learned that it was an errant rocket from Hamas. 200 to 300 people were killed in one of the 23 hospitals in Gaza that serve 2.3 billion people. That's because the Antichrist's number is 23. The basketball president who wore 23 in high school. Also, the mark of the Antichrist alters a person's 23 chromosomes. And also 2 divided by 3 is 0.666, the number that symbolizes the Antichrist in Bible prophecy. And Jesus said to Peter that the rooster would not crow twice before he would deny him 3 times. And that's because taking the mark of the Antichrist that changes a person's 23 chromosomes is tantamount to denying Jesus. Anyway, we had this theme of 23, and this is just another example of these patterns and things you will only know if you are studying God's signs and connecting and developing the big picture as is meant to be done with his big picture of signs. Okay. And anyway, also, by the way, to confirm his signs and connections, God pairs certain numbers together. Let me explain. First of all, this is how it works. God's true big picture of signs, patterns, and connections, which is only being explained on this channel, works on the principle of second and third and multiple witnesses confirming a matter as the Bible says is required. And this is what makes what is being explained on this channel true and not a product of one's imagination and different and unique than everything else on the internet that claims to be an analysis of God's prophetic signs. And one simple way in which he would provide a second witness for us, if we think about it, is through pairing certain numbers together, such as 23 and 44 and 9. And I know this because I have been studying his big picture of signs from morning until night for more than full-time hours for 7 years. This is because the Antichrist 44th president was inaugurated in 2009, and he was the basketball president who wore 23. That's why, for example, you see at the bottom of this diagram a 9 plus 9 plus 9 weeks connection, because God repeats the number 3 times for emphasis of its symbolic meaning, connecting with this 44 weeks, which then connects to the 200 to 300 people dying in the 23rd, one of 23 hospitals that serve 2.3 billion people. Okay, so that's a pairing of 23 and 44. Now, God also pairs 23 and 11. That's why we have this 110 weeks connection to this 23. Okay? And that's because 1123 is the 188th prime number, and God uses this number frequently to point to H188 in Strong's Hebrew Concordance, which is the word that means woe! Exclamation mark. It is used in the Bible in the context of extreme judgment from God. Kamala Harris is predicted to die near the Gateway Arch in St. Louis, and she was born 1 year, 8 months, and 8 days after construction began on the Gateway Arch, which hints at 188, obviously. Now, that's interesting that we have this connection right here, because that's also how we connect to the date of her predicted crash next to the Gateway Arch. Because we have this connection here. 1 year, 2 months, and 7 days is the 11th, 127 in other words, which is what it hints at, is the 11th super prime number. Okay, 127 is the 31st prime number, and 31 is the 11th prime number, making this the 11th super prime number of days, time period, I should say. And that connects or patterns or pairs with the 23 in the signs on this date. Okay, so that's the second witness confirmation of what I'm talking about. This 11th super prime number from the 23s giving us an 1123, which again, as I just explained, points to 188 and Kamala Harris, her death in a plane crash at the Gateway Arch. Okay. Now, the other signs we received on that day are amazing. I'll just touch on them briefly. Like I said, I won't explain much, but that was the day that, because of the Gaza explosion, Joe Biden learned of it literally right before he was boarding his Air Force plane. Kamala Harris is predicted to die in her Air Force 2 plane. They're both the same planes, just different numbers, right? The 747s. He boarded his plane right after the news of this and went to the Middle East anyway, but he was originally supposed to go for the talks between 4 Middle East leaders. Okay, it would be, I think it was him and 3 other Middle East leaders, maybe the King of Jordan, and I forget. All right, but it was going to be 4 of them, and that's because it hints at the prophecy in Zechariah 1:17. Kamala Harris is predicted to die in a plane crash in St. Louis, over which the path of totality of the eclipse in 2017 peaked at 1:17 p.m. Okay, the eclipse began peaking at 1:17 p.m., and that was over St. Louis. That's because of Zechariah 1:17, which speaks of which is a very important end times prophecy. Zechariah is an end times prophet. Zechariah 1:17, this first chapter in Zechariah, it speaks of 4 horns. In Bible prophecy, a horn is symbolic of a leader or a king. So it was the 4 horns, because it was the 4 leaders that were supposed to be talking, but then was canceled because of the explosion. But not only that, Kamala Harris was also in the news on this day, and for flying in her plane and arriving in the 4 Corners region of the U.S. She gave a talk at the university in Flagstaff, Arizona. And I know the area of the country, that is definitely 4 Corners region. But not only that, it was a university. And that's because in the prophecy, it's not only 4 horns, but also 4 craftsmen. A craftsman is a trade. People go to university to learn trades. Of course, today people don't call them trades because if it's a university, it's more likely not a trade, but a different kind of profession where they work in an office. But nonetheless, that's what the symbolism is, with her giving a talk at a university. There's, like I'm saying, so much more second, third, multiple witnesses confirming all of this, like the details of this particular university and on and on and on. And it's amazing, and you need to watch the Gaza explosion video, okay? But also on that day, we had a second witness to the 4 Corners, because we had another sign in the 4 Corners region, which I forget what it was exactly, but I think that was the day that charges were dropped, or it was the sentencing of the person that shot the gun at the movie set in Santa Fe. And Santa Fe is 4 Corners region. It's a city, it's the 4 Corners region. That's the New Mexico side of the Arizona-New Mexico border. So it was another very important, because the whole Rust story and prophetic thing is another story God is telling. That was a part of that story, which I won't get into. But it's symbolism for the mark of the Antichrist, because shootings and things that come out of guns and go into people are symbolic of the things that come out of things and go into people. Furthermore, the rust is symbolic too, because this thing that was put into people has these metallic parts. And on and on. Okay, so that's also explained in other videos, and I think I go into that a little bit, at least in the Gaza explosion video. So that was another sign. It was a second witness confirmation to come to the Kamala Harris plane sign. Oh, the highway that she landed her plane in at the airport in Flagstaff. I forget the details. Anyway, like I say, it goes on and on and on, and really on and on and on and on and on. It's just infinite, God's science. And when you try to start talking about one thing, it goes off into infinity. Okay, because that's God. He is infinite, right? And so his big picture of science is infinite. And it's a huge challenge to try to explain it because it's not two-dimensional. It's three-dimensional. And you try to explain one part of the web, and you end up pulling the entire web. All right. Now, so I've established that this was the prophetic date. It was a Kamala Harris plain sign day, all right? Now, the reason for it, too, was on the date 1017, and this prophecy is pointing to, or rather the signs pointed to the prophecy in Zechariah 1:17. But also Kamala Harris will die in St. Louis, which is where the eclipse peaked at 1:17 p.m. Okay? So that's the significance of the date 117, and that was also further confirmed with the signs. I mean, this was a major date here. It was huge, and it was extremely important. And like I say, to learn the full story, you need to watch the Gaza explosion video. Now, I think I've explained enough. This is also, this 11th superprime number connection is also exactly 62 weeks. And that comes from the most central prophecy in the Bible regarding also the timing of the period of the end and the Antichrist, who, by the way, is the 44th president, which is incidentally why 4 horns and 4 craftsmen were pointed at with these signs, involving also the number 23, because the 44th president wore 23, and we have the 4 craftsmen and 4 horns sign, which hints at 44. And it is through the death of Kamala Harris in a plane crash that the 44th president will become the president again, after it is predicted that Donald Trump will die 2 days after the death of Kamala Harris, and then Congress will vote Michelle Obama as the temporary president. Biden will, of course, replace Kamala Harris with Michelle Obama, and then she will be appointed the temporary president, and she will appoint Barack Obama as her vice president before she will step down. Anyway, this is also relevant to Kamala Harris because in this prophecy, we have a 62 period followed by a 62 weeks period followed by a 7 weeks period. These weeks in this prophecy are symbolic of a series of 7 years. And so it's really 62 times 7 years followed by 7 times 7 years. And 7 times 7 is 49. And Kamala Harris is the 49th vice president. That's why she will connect with this hidden 49 here in this connection. That's why the 49th vice president will die after this hidden 49 number in this connection here. Now also, it's 119% of a calendar year. That hints at the plane crashes on 9/11. And Kamala Harris's flight path will mirror that of Flight 77 on 9/11. And 77 hints at 7 times 7 is 49. But it also hints at 11 times 7, which hints at Zechariah 1:17. And this date, 10/17. Flight 77. Okay? Because her flight will mirror that, because it'll be prophetic how it will mirror that of Flight 77. And that's why it was Flight 77, by the way. It was because it was designed all along to point to the 49th vice president who will have a similar flight path. Not similar, basically the exact same flight path. All right? And I think that'll do it for this introduction here. Now, the rest of this video will explain the stories here, some of them anyway, because this isn't even all of the Harrison Ford stories, not even close. But nonetheless, I put a lot of stuff together here, and I think you will find it very important and interesting. All right, now, the focus of this, arguably, because it's a big picture and it's an interconnected web, but if we were to focus on one thing, I want to talk about here, first of all, this date here, October 17th, 2020, which was exactly 3 years before it is predicted Kamala Harris will die in a plane crash. This was the prophetic sign on this date was when it was first realized that God was using the aviation mishaps of Harrison Ford to point to the day that Kamala Harris will die in a plane crash, which is how the Antichrist will come to power, which is why she will die in a plane crash. In fact, prior to realizing that she will die in a plane crash, it was realized that Barack Obama would become the president again through Joe Biden stepping down. But anyway, long before the shoplifted referendum, for example, I knew, even before he was installed, that he would ultimately be stepping down in order to make way for the return of Barack Obama. The question was, how would this unfold exactly? Anyway, so it was in 2020, after October, that it was realized that this would be how. It would be through the death of Kamala Harris. All right? And so this date was known ahead of time, and it was known to be a date on which to expect an explosion. In fact, because I didn't know what to think, and because of the signs that God was demonstrating, I believed at the time, rightfully so, that this would be the end of the trail of signs that God is using to point to the coming explosion in New York City, which, by the way, is predicted to be on December 2nd. But we did get an explosion on this date. This was the explosion in Harrisonburg, Virginia. It was a national news story. And so we had this explosion in Harrisonburg, and some of the main reasons why I knew of this date ahead of time were because of these connections from Harrison Ford signs. And that's why it was astounding to have an explosion in Harrisonburg. I now actually believe that Kamala Harris's plane will crash when her engine explodes. But that's because the signs overlap. God is also pointing through this sign here to the coming explosion in New York City. And I'll explain. So we had this date here, July 13th, 2019, which was Harrison Ford's 77th birthday. This was the day of the Manhattan blackout that occurred exactly 110 minutes short of an exact 42 years from the infamous New York City blackout that put 9 million people without power for over 24 hours in 1977. Okay? So, again, this was Ford's 77th birthday. Ford's Star Wars career spanned 42 years because 2019 was the last Star Wars movie that he was in. And this was exactly the Manhattan blackout on this day was 42 years after the New York City blackout in 1977, the year that Star Wars was released. So we had this uncanny connection with Harrison Ford. And speaking of his birthday, Harrison Ford was born in Chicago, and Chicago is symbolism for Barack Obama, the Antichrist. So then after this, we had a Star Wars sign, which was a plane crash. It was exactly 9 + 9 + 9 days later. And this was part of a trail of signs that I realized back then that God was demonstrating that were at 9-day intervals. 9 signs at 9-day intervals. It began with the earthquake on Pentecost on June 16th, the 3.2 magnitude earthquake, rare earthquake at Jericho, because the walls of security of Jericho collapsed due to an earthquake. Anyway, I don't want to get off into a tangent, but it ended with another. The following one was the earthquake in Manhattan, and the following one was the July 4th earthquake. Is it in this diagram? It isn't, but it should be. This is the typo. So this Manhattan blackout was 9 days after the July 4th earthquake, the Ridgecrest earthquake. If you recall, it was a prophetic sign. I won't explain it though. The wall that collapsed behind the scene of the viral video of the kids in their school play. Okay, so and then there was another 9 days to this. That was the strongest earthquake in 20 years that the media was saying was the strongest earthquake in 20 years. But little did they know that it was exactly 20 biblical years after the earthquake that they're talking about, the 7.0 earthquake in Joshua Tree, California. And again, the walls of security collapsed due to an earthquake in Jericho. Archaeology proves this. And the Israelites enacted a symbolic 3 sets of 7. They blew 7 trumpets. They marched around for 7 days. That's why the 7.0 earthquake in Joshua Tree, California. And this was exactly 151 months, which hints at 1 plus 5 equals, plus 1 equals 7, to the release of the Joshua Tree album by U2 and the song With or Without You, which is symbolic of a God going his way with or without America. And also 151 is the 36th prime number, and 36 is the number that God uses to hint at 666, because 36 hints at 3 sixes. Also, it is 6 times 6 and 2 times 18, which is 6 plus 6 plus 6. And the 36th triangular number, which in a triangle of numbers, the last number in the 36th row is 666. And 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus 4, all the way up to 36, equals 666. Also, Barack Obama's birth certificate forgery was file number 151, made by Loretta Fuddy, whose name in gematria equals 151. And she was the health director, and anyway, on and on. So anyway, I don't want to get off onto that. I just wanted to go through that quickly there. But getting back to this is why it is 9 plus 9 plus 9 days from the Manhattan blackout, which was also a Barack Obama sign. I don't want to get into the details of this sign either. We have a lot of information to get through. But this was 9 plus 9 plus 9 days, and the number 9 is the most important number in God's big picture of signs, which is only being explained on this channel. As from the Bible, the number 9 symbolizes God's judgment. And that's why it's 9 plus 9 plus 9 days exactly after that to this Star Wars Canyon. Now, there's this Rainbow Canyon in Death Valley, nicknamed the Star Wars Canyon, and it, for aviation enthusiasts, is the place where they make a pilgrimage to, if you will, where they go and watch these jet fighter pilots fly their airplanes into the canyon. And from the top of the canyon, they can look down onto the cockpit of the pilot, because they're flying into the canyon, and there's a resemblance between this and the canyon that the X-Wing fighters fly into on the Death Star in the movie Star Wars. Hence why the Death Valley National Park and Star Wars Canyon. But on this day, the plane flew into the canyon wall and injured 7 tourists, and which had to be rushed to the hospital, and or not rushed, but they were taken to the hospital. So anyway, that was and the connection from this is 444 days, and God pairs 9 and 44 together to confirm the signs and connections. The 44th president became the president in 2009. And this is how God's true big picture of signs, patterns, and connections works. It works on the principle of second and third and multiple witnesses confirming a matter, as the Bible says is required. And this is what makes what is being explained on this channel true and not a product of one's imagination, and different and unique than everything else on the internet that claims to be an analysis of God's prophetic signs. And one simple way in which he would provide a second witness for us, if we think about it, is through pairing certain numbers together. And anyway, the number 9 and 44 are paired together frequently to confirm the signs and connections and to point to the Antichrist, the 44th president, who became president in 2009. Anyway, so that's why we have this 9 plus 9 plus 9 days, and God repeats a number 3 times for emphasis of its symbolic meaning. And that's also why the 444, which also hints at the 44th president. So we have 9 plus 9 plus 9 and then 444, and that gets us to this date, which again was known ahead of time. And this was one of the reasons, this 444 days. And one of the reasons why is because Star Wars Canyon, the movie Star Wars, is actually the 4th episode. The first Star Wars is oddly titled the 4th episode in the Star Wars saga. And so anyway, the climax of the movie is an explosion. And we had an explosion in Star Wars Canyon, and I think you know where I'm going here. And the fact that that connected with the Manhattan blackout, to me, it was quite clear. This was, and there's way more to knowing why this is the case. But it was clear that we're talking about an explosion in Manhattan. And that's why I thought it would be on this day. But this is just another step in the trail of signs to that day, which again, as I said, is predicted to be on December 2nd, 2023. Okay, so this is one reason why I knew of this Harrisonburg explosion ahead of time. This is exactly 3 people were injured, and I think I mentioned it already, maybe not. That's confirmation for this exact 3 years to the date it is predicted that Kamala Harris will die in a plane crash. 3 people were injured at the finish line of a marathon, and this was 90 months exactly after the West Texas explosion, which coincided with the Boston Marathon explosion that killed 3 people at that finish line of the marathon. These 3 students were the 3 injured were students at James Madison University in Virginia, and James Madison wrote the Constitution, and Barack Obama is the unconstitutional president who will do away with the Constitution. Okay, and so that's why the 3 years, also that's 36 months exactly, and I just explained the prophetic significance of the number 36, as it is symbolism for 666. Okay, so that was one way in which I knew of this date ahead of time, this Harrisonburg explosion on October 17th, 2020. Another connection, which was confirmation of this, which I knew ahead of time, was this exact 66 weeks connection from the Manhattan blackout and the 77th birthday of Harrison Ford, etc. Okay, so I had these 2 ways in which I knew this date ahead of time. Little did I know back then, though, that the 3 injured was actually hinting at 3 years to the death of Kamala Harris in a plane crash. Had I known that, it was designed by God, because had I known that, I wouldn't have learned about so many other things, because I would have just not been focused on it. I would have just, I know when it is, But anyway, it's amazing to look back and see that the 3 injured was actually all along a hint at adding 3 years. All right. Now, God also pairs 9 and 110 together to confirm the signs and connections. And let's see, I could play a clip, but I've played it many times in other videos, so I won't. One reason is that it hints at the 9-foot-high wall of security that Wall Street was named after by the Dutch when they built it, and the 110 stories that collapsed on 9/11. 9 and 110 actually pair together also to hint at 9/11. So they confirm the signs and connections, and we have this exact 110 weeks from this explosion in Star Wars Canyon in Death Valley National Park, making it a national judgment sign, to this 7.0 magnitude earthquake in Mexico. Now, God uses earthquakes on the other side of the border wall of security as Joshua symbolism, because the walls of security collapsed due to an earthquake, as archaeology proves. And the Israelites were marching around the walls, outside of the walls of security, before they then collapsed in God's judgment. So that's why God uses earthquakes from time to time in Mexico earthquakes, as judgment warning for America. And this was also the day of the Feast of Trumpets. And when the walls of security collapsed on Jericho, the Israelites blew trumpets. And the 7.0, again, is because, like this earthquake here, 7.0, it hints at the 7s in the account. They marched around once per day for 7 days, and then they blew 7 trumpets. So that's why it's a 7.0 earthquake. This was the day that Mexico legalized abortion. But God's signs are for America. And people, have asked me, well, why are you so focused on America? The answer to that is God is. There are only 2 nations in in world history, that were founded on a relationship with God, Israel and America. America is God's Gentile nation, and God's big picture of end times signs are warnings of judgment and destruction for his Gentile nation. They aren't signs for Mexico. This is a sign for America, okay? But this was the day that Mexico legalized abortion, but because it is an earthquake sign on the other side of the border wall of security, making it a judgment warning for America, it's pointing to the abortions in America. Of course, God is not happy with the abortions in Mexico either. Don't get me wrong. It's all symbolism. It's all judgment symbolism. God is focused on America. Okay. And further confirmation of that, by the way, is this was the day that it was reported, or rather, it was the day that it happened, that $1,500 worth of grapes were stolen from a church in Liberty, Missouri. Okay, so on the Feast of Trumpets, 1,500, because this Feast of Trumpets is symbolic of the church and the rapture. Not that the rapture is on the Feast of Trumpets, but it was the Feast of Trumpets that the grapes were stolen on, and when the rapture happens, it'll be at the sound of the last trump, as the Apostle Paul wrote. And which is why this coincided with this earthquake in Mexico. And it is amazing because the name of the place is Liberty, which is hinting at the rapture. The grapes also hint at the grapes that are harvested and thrown into the winepress of God's wrath. It's also judgment warning. And the main theme of God's big picture of signs is judgment warning for the church. Make sure you watch the 23 church signs video on this channel. When this prediction comes to pass, you should know that you need to watch every minute of every video on this channel, but make sure you watch the 23 church signs video on this channel, especially if you are a Christian, arguably the most important video. Now, also, what confirms this, because again, God pairs 9 and 110 together to confirm the signs and connections. This was the day that the nation of El Salvador first made Bitcoin legal tender. And they were the first nation to do this. And on the same day that they did that, Bitcoin lost $9,000. It was a news story. El Salvador, because El Salvador is Spanish for the Savior, and the geographical area of El Salvador is almost exactly the same geographical size as the nation of Israel. And that was, of course, designed by God. And so we have this El Salvador sign on the day of the Mexico earthquake, also Latin America, and the 9,000 loss of Bitcoin, which confirms the 110 weeks connection onwards to the predicted date that Kamala Harris will die in a plane crash. Furthermore, this is the Feast of Trumpets, and trumpets were blown when the earthquake happened that crashed the walls of Jericho in God's judgment. The Antichrist is God's judgment, who will rise to power as a result of the death of Kamala Harris in a plane crash, and he will enforce the mark of the Antichrist, which is the thing. And you know what I'm talking about, the thing that you can't talk about. But how it will be enforced is through digital programmable currency, which will restrict people who refuse to take the mark from being able to buy and sell food. That will be rationed. And that's why we have this Bitcoin sign. You would think that God would include a Bitcoin sign at some point, because this is how the mark of the Antichrist will be enforced. And he did so beautifully with this El Salvador sign, with 9,000 lost, because 9 symbolizes judgment, but it pairs with the 110 weeks. And 110 because of earthquake, because Joshua, who died at 110, led the Israelites around the walls of security of Jericho before they collapsed due to an earthquake while they blew 7 trumpets. And this coincides with the church sign, with the grapes that were stolen from Liberty. And they were stolen too in the middle of the night. And Jesus said he's the thief in the night, coming for his church in the rapture. But make no mistake, this is a warning. Many Christians believe all Christians will be raptured. In fact, one of the things that God is warning of most is the doctrine that he hates, that is said that he hates in Revelation chapter 2, and is coming to make war with the sword of his mouth on those that teach and have the works that are a product of this doctrine, including the doctrine that all Christians will be raptured. Make sure you watch the 23 Church Signs video. I'm refraining from going off onto a diatribe on doctrine here. So let's just move on. But the 3 sets of 7 in the book of Joshua, because they marched around once per day for 7 days, and then on the 7th day, they marched 7 times while blowing 7 trumpets. It was a 3 sets of 7. That's why this prophetic Joshua symbolic earthquake was exactly 37 weeks, which is at 3 sets of 7 after this date. Now, what happened on this date? This was the date that Kamala Harris first announced her itinerary for her first trip after becoming the vice president to Latin America to investigate supposedly the source of the border wall of security crisis. But the truth is, the source of the border wall of security crisis is America's relationship with God. But anyway, that was the day she announced it, and there's other prophetic signs on this day. Like, I won't get into it. I've explained it in another video. Make sure you watch the American Pharaoh prophecy video. All right? All right, yeah, that's good. We've already explained it in another video. But it does connect with Kamala Harris and the border wall of security. Because she, if you know, she was put in charge of the border wall of security, which is symbolism for Joshua, who died at the age of 110. Furthermore, 110 weeks is 110 times 7 days, and the Israelites enacted the 3 sets of 7, as I mentioned. And furthermore, we have 210 weeks connections on either side of this Feast of Trumpets earthquake. All right, I'm happy to have had the opportunity to document what really happened on this September 7th, 2021 date, the prophetic signs, and how it is all pointing to the Antichrist and the mark of the Antichrist enforced through digital currency, which will test the faith of quote-unquote Christians. All right. Where to next? Let's go down. Okay. So this Harrisonburg, Virginia explosion was 2 years exactly after this date, which was also known ahead of time. Okay. This was the day that 2 rockets were accidentally fired from Gaza into Israel. It was the first time that long-range rockets had been fired at Israel since the end of the 50-day war. 50-day war is prophetic because the Feast of Pentecost is symbolic of the church, and it literally means 50th day. But anyway, the end of the 50-day war was exactly 6 times 6 times 6 weeks before this date, when these first rockets fired since then were fired into Israel. Now, one of them hit an apartment, and fortunately the woman and her children had rushed into their shelter just a second before it hit, and so they survived. But had they died, we might have a different history. There might have been a new war at that time. But it later was learned that the rockets were fired accidentally because of lightning. A lightning strike accidentally set off the rockets. And that's amazing because lightning is symbolism for the Antichrist. In fact, the name Barak in Hebrew means lightning. And his name in Hebrew means lightning from heaven. In fact, Jesus said he saw Satan falling like lightning from heaven in Luke 10:18. And Barack Obama in Hebrew means lightning from heaven. Barak means lightning. Obama means high place, which in the Bible is a metaphor for heaven. And O means, in language Jesus would have spoken, Aramaic, from. And so Barack Obama means lightning from heaven. Either Jesus didn't know what he was saying when he said this, or he knew that there would be a famous president named Barack Obama and said this anyway, knowing that it would confuse us, or he was revealing the identity of the Antichrist. Well, anyway, the Antichrist, when he comes to power after the fall from the high place of Kamala Harris, will be symbolism for when Jesus said he saw Satan falling like lightning from heaven. And I said earlier that God uses the number 23 to point to Barack Obama and pairs it with 44. And so 2 years plus and 3 years is a hint at 23. And we have in the middle of it this 444 days connection. And this pairs all together here. And again, the Antichrist wore jersey 23 and will become the president again in 2023. So that's why 2 years and then 3 years. It's amazing. Furthermore, this connection is also 2 times 30 months, which is also a hint at 23. It also is exactly 500% of a year. And the 500th word in Strong's Greek Concordance is the word Antichrist. Okay. Also, this 444 days is followed by 44 days from this October 17th Harrisonburg, Virginia explosion to this date here, November 30th, which was when the news reported in an interview with Glenn Close her comments. It was about Air Force One, because this was the time when the shoplifted referendum had just happened a few days earlier, and Kamala Harris had been installed as the first woman vice president. Well, in this famous movie starring Harrison Ford, Air Force One, Glenn Close plays a female vice president. Okay? And the story is the directors had asked her to play a crying vice president, to cry in the movie and all this, right? But she refused. She said, no, I'm not going to do that because I don't want to portray a female vice president in that way as someone, weak or something to that effect. Wouldn't be a good image for a first female vice president. Anyway, Kamala Harris is predicted to die in her Air Force Two plane. And that's why this is 44 days, because it hints at the 44th president, which is why she will die in a plane crash. Now, this November 30th date is down here too. And it's 666 days after this date. So this Glenn Close Air Force One sign that points to Kamala Harris, the vice president, and her death in a plane crash, her Air Force Two plane, is 666 days after this plane crash in California, which she tweeted about, because at the time she was the senator from California and she was tweeting her condolences, etc. Because on this day, a plane crashed into the residential neighborhood of Yorba Linda, California, which is a suburb of Los Angeles. And this is the home of the Richard Nixon Presidential Library. And Richard Nixon was the only president to have used the 25th Amendment to appoint Gerald Ford, who was the only president to never have been elected vice president or president. He was appointed instead. Just like how Barack Obama will not be elected. Instead, he will be appointed through the 25th Amendment. And this is how we will overcome the restriction on someone being elected more than twice. And that's why the name Harrison Ford. So this plane crash in Yorba Linda pointed to Gerald Ford and Kamala Harris. And also, on the same day, we had a Harrison Ford sign. This was the day of the Super Bowl, and Super Bowls are known for their commercials, and one of the big ones was the Amazon commercial starring Harrison Ford as himself. It was all about a blackout as well, and it's all part of the signs that are pointing to the blackout, and furthermore, it connected with 23 weeks exactly to the Manhattan blackout. That's astounding. 23 weeks because the Antichrist wore Jersey 23, as we have explained. And that pairs with the 9. As I explained, God pairs 9 and 23 together to confirm the signs and connections. If I didn't explain that, well, I'm explaining it now. The basketball president who wore Jersey 23 and will become the president again in 2023 became president in 2009. So that's so anyway, the blackout commercial connected with the Harrison Ford birthday Manhattan blackout. It's amazing. The blackout that's ultimately being pointed to, because this was the day of Manhattanhenge too, which is the day twice a year when the sun sets perfectly in between the canyons of the canyon walls of Manhattan, and it happened during the blackout. Anyway, God is pointing to the accompanying explosion from the sun that will cause the blackout and knock out the nation's power grid. And this blackout in this commercial was seen from space. The country is going in a blackout from space. Okay, now one connection here. This Super Bowl was 17 years after the Super Bowl in 2002, right after 9/11, when Tom Brady and the Patriots famously began their last-minute winning drive from the 17-yard line with a score at 17-17, and then won the game. This was hinting at the 17 minutes in between the two planes that struck the two towers just a couple months earlier. And then in this Super Bowl, Tom Brady went into the Super Bowl with 17 Super Bowl records and being in 9 of the 11 Patriots Super Bowls. And this is why this Super Bowl is 17 days to the date it's predicted that Kamala Harris will die in a plane crash. It connects to this plane crash here too, directly. All right. Now here's some more Harrison Ford aviation mishaps. On this day, he landed his plane on the taxiway, not a runway. And so he got into big trouble with the FAA, and they investigated him, and exactly 2 + 3 months later, the FAA cleared him, and this was also 4 times 44 days to the Harrisonburg explosion, which was 23 days after the FAA cleared him, which is 2 + 3 days after the mishap. So this is all, again, another pairing of 23 and 44 that confirms the signs and connections. Did I explain that? I think I did. No, that was the other video I did. Okay, so the 44th president, the basketball president who wore jersey 23, became the president again will become the president again in 2023. And this is why, essentially, God pairs 44 and 23 together to confirm the signs and connections and to point to the Antichrist. But anyway, the day that he was cleared was 2 times 300 days exactly after the plane crash on the day of the Harrison Ford commercial. Okay, and then plane crash pointing to Gerald Ford. All right, 188 days. Let's see. We'll do this really quick. 188 days is the number that God uses to point to the 188th word in Strong's Hebrew Concordance, which means woe, ! Used in context of extreme judgment from God. And this was the day that Kamala Harris's plane, as she departed for her trip to Latin America to investigate the supposed border wall of security crisis, her plane had an aviation mishap. She had to return in an emergency landing back to Washington and spent 90 minutes transferring planes onto another plane. This was the 55th anniversary of the Temple Mount. On this day, player number 55 ruined his perfect no-hitter when he hit the other player, number 55, on the foot in a baseball game between Cleveland and Chicago. Barack Obama is from Chicago. Cleveland was the only president that served non-consecutive terms, just like President Barack Obama will serve non-consecutive terms. Okay, so this was an aviation sign involving Kamala Harris. It's amazing. This is a big, important sign here. That's why 188 days from the Glenn Close Air Force One plane to the Air Force Two plane mishap here on the 55th anniversary of the Temple Mount. And Kamala Harris will die in St. Louis near the I-55 highway. This is 222 days to the Cleveland signs, and President Cleveland was the 22nd president. There was also a prophetic plane crash on this day and also a sign involving 144 horses. That's why it was 144 days before this day, which was no, sorry, this was the 55th anniversary of the Temple Mount, not this date. I apologize. Anyway, on this day, there was many prophetic signs. The sinkhole in the parking lot of the hospital in Jerusalem at the Temple Mount on the 55th anniversary. And also Kamala Harris made her big announcement about the $19 billion for the border wall of security. And this was the day that the biggest ever caravan began its march to the border wall of security, as in Joshua, and on and on. And she also attended the 9th Summit of the Americas, hence the 9 + 9 + 9 weeks connection to this date here, which was the death of the air raid coach. Her plane will crash due to an air raid of a bird strike. The coach, the GOAT of all time college football coaching, was named Coach of the Year twice and 3 times for his conference, which hints at 23, which pairs with the 9 and the 44 weeks exactly to the date it is predicted that Kamala Harris will die in a plane crash. All right. So I think I covered it all here in this diagram. Believe me, I know far better than you how the prediction made in this video was derived. And more importantly, I know far better than you why the righteous Christian God of the Bible has given me a voice through this prediction. If you are a quote-unquote Christian or Muslim, this prediction was not learned through a demon. Be warned that blaspheming the Holy Spirit is the unforgivable sin. If you are a New Ager or New Spirituality person, this prediction was not learned through somehow tapping into the supposed universal collective consciousness. If you are a conspiracy theorist, this prediction was not learned through figuring out a supposed code that the Illuminati and Satanists are using. This prediction was learned through the Bible and through watching carefully the Lord's prophetic signs, which Jesus commanded all Christians to do. Besides proving that Jesus Christ is the Lord, the reason why God has given me a voice through this prediction is to prove that the controversial things that I am saying in the videos on this channel are the truth. Therefore, a wise person will want to watch all of the videos on this channel. What I will also do is create a video or two that summarizes some of the controversial things that the Lord will prove to be true when the prediction being made in this video comes to pass. I will leave links to these must-watch videos in the description box below this video. Again, the purpose of this prediction, that is from God, is to prove these things that I will talk about. And therefore, it would be foolish to not watch the videos that I will leave links for in the description box below this video. Aliens and UFOs are demons masquerading as aliens and UFOs. Most people's spiritual experiences are demonic deception, especially if they are not a true follower of Christ. In the last days, many people who claim to be a follower of Christ will have spiritual experiences that are in reality demonic. God became a man and died a horrible death at the hand of the ruler of this world, Satan, and then defeated death for you, so that you too can overcome death, which is the price that must be paid for sin. It is time to repent, which means to change one's ways and turn to God and become a disciple of Jesus. Please leave a like and upvote the video, and once this prediction has come to pass, share this video with everyone you know, and more, don't stop sharing it everywhere in social media. It is essential that everyone immediately read the homepage of my website, TrumpPrediction.com. If you are watching this on the YouTube platform, please note that not all of the videos are on YouTube. You need to switch to the Odyssey.com or Rumble.com channel, and do it now in case you aren't able to later.